everyone, back with another video, and this time I wanted to quickly talk about something that I actually kind of forgot I had on this wall back there, and that is this year HF Armory HAF Smallsword. Okay, but before we get to that though, formalities out of the way, as per usual. So first and foremost, I paid for this Smallsword with my own money, and HF Armory was not aware that there was going to be any kind of review or video about it. I got it as part of a larger club order a while ago, actually. Then the structure of the video will be the same as always, meaning there will be my talking part here now. Then after that I will go over why I got this, ordering process, then stats, things I liked, maybe didn't like, the actual review part, hopefully bring it to a good conclusion. And after that there will be pictures with the stats and just, one or two pictures of how this looks in still. And I don't think I actually have fencing footage because I forgot to film any when we had our haul. It's closed at the moment for, the rest of the year. So maybe if I find a clip, I'll put it. If there's none, sorry about that. I just didn't have any. But still wanted to talk about this. So here goes ordering process. To start with that, not going to say too much here. It was part of a larger club order that we got from HF Armory. In general, things went well, but especially customs was a bit of a pain. If you want to know details about that, go check out the HF Armory Rapier review that I did. There I talk a bit more about that. In general, I've always contacted them over Facebook and their things went well. I've heard about other people that they sometimes have problems reaching them, getting replies from them. That wasn't really always my experience. Mostly things went just fine for me, but sometimes you need to push them a bit more, especially when it comes to getting the tracking number. But overall, a fine experience, really. Now, the reason why I got this is that this is the HF AHF Smallsword. So it's the HF Historical Fencing Armory Academy of Historical Fencing Smallsword. They have some other versions, and that means it is made with input from Nick Thomas from the HFF. And he has a lot of originals, and he likes to give his insights on how historical pieces feel to makers, and we all benefit from that. And that is the result-ish. Have to put a bit of a disclaimer on that one because, well, actually, if you look on the website, there's a different grip on there. I think what's on the webpage is just a normal Leon Paul grip. At least it looks exactly like the one that I have from them. And there's also a musketeer blade on this, which for a long time has been the more small swordy options for everyone, but the thing is they can't make those anymore because, of course, Ukraine is being invaded by Russia at the moment. So you can get this, but different grip, different kind of blade. But I knew that going in, and I still was interested in it just for getting something that could potentially be a good working piece. And again, something maybe to recommend someone who doesn't have the budget to go for a higher quality piece. There's many nice options around nowadays. Or maybe just someone who doesn't want to spend the bucks because Smallsword isn't exactly the main thing they do, and they still don't want to just get a foil, which is of course always a valid option, being that foil is the training weapon for the Smallsword ever since back then, really. But that was my reason for getting it. Mostly TLDR, it's just, curiosity got the better of me, and I thought, if we already do a larger order, might as well. If we look at the piece we actually have, many things are just standard. It's the standard sports tank construction, really, which is nice because that makes it moddable very easily. It's a standard épée blade, 90 centimeters long. It does have a POB of around, I think it was like 8.3-ish centimeters. Not completely in the grip, which I always like. It gives you something to work with. You have a 10 centimeter dish here. I think this one might be Leon Paul. and it's 1 millimeter thick material. Then there's a bit of nice padding here. Then you have 6 millimeter of guard that is like historically inspired. And then you have the grip, and the grip I wasn't quite sure how to measure it actually, because if we just go by the wooden part, then it's like 7-ish centimeters, 6.8. But, you know, if you grip it, of course, you also work with that part. So if we take this whole piece here together with the pommel, then we have 12 centimeters. But depending on how you grip it, you also grip into this part here where the rings are, and then it's more like 15 centimeters. Hope I remember that right. When it comes to the piece itself, as I mentioned, I like that the POB isn't completely in the grip. I prefer that. Actually, it gives you something to work with, as I said. It's generally a very practical piece, like most pieces from HF Armory are. The rings are not really for putting your finger through, because I mean, I guess you can make that work. It doesn't really work for me. I don't think it's meant to be, but it is nice for putting your finger alongside the cross. So if you do Kreuzler, this one will work just fine if you grip it like that, really. Things I noticed, well, one thing I noticed, and that you probably already saw, is this isn't browned. This is just surface rust, because as I mentioned, I kind of forgot I had this for a while, and with historical fencing armory pieces, they are very vulnerable to rust, really. It's not active anymore, but you know, it's still there. That's on me, of course, but something to keep in mind if you get this. I generally like how it handles with the POB and everything. I noticed that the blade seems to be rather susceptible to taking a bend. Not the biggest problem, really. You just bend it back and in the end rather bend than break, and they all kind of tend to do that, but I feel like it does it more than blades from other makers I have. Not the biggest problem, but worth noting and keeping in mind. I like the guard, really. It's fine the way it is. I like that it's actually not gigantic rings, but rather some that are more made for putting your finger alongside it. Because you often have pieces where there are rings for putting your finger through and then they're giant. So this one is way nicer looking and feeling to me personally for what I want to do. I wasn't or am not the biggest fan of the grip, because this is rather soft wood, and while the form is fine, you have these little wings over the cross here where it kind of sets into the cross to orient it. Problem with that is, this being kind of softer wood, if you turn it around, it turns, if you tighten it, you give the grip a slight turn, as you might just be able to see. I have to see if I maybe then put a picture on. And that means that this can crack just from the torque you put it on it, from the force it has from gripping into the cross and being turned. Because this isn't thick, the wings here, and this isn't hard wood. Hasn't happened with mine, but I've seen that. That is definitely something that I would change in the mid to long term, really. I would just put a different grip on it. Now the good thing is, this being a sports tang, you can, just not a problem. There's probably lots of nice options out there if you happen to have a 3D printer or happen to know someone who has a 3D printer. All in all, I actually like this for, you know, a more affordable starter piece. It handles nice. It doesn't quite handle the way I imagine it that Nick would want it, simply because they can't make the blade at the moment. It would be a bit more blade heavy, which I personally would find even nicer. But all in all, this is still a nice piece for a training smallsword. It still kind of looks the part, but it is still utilitarian, which is also nice because then you don't need to feel too bad. There are certainly pieces out there available right now that are very nice. Like this one I have back here, for example, which is made after an original. It's just a cast. Very fancy, but I wouldn't necessarily do all the things I sometimes do with the small sword with that one. Like, for example, if you look into McBain, and then you maybe want to try small sword against broadsword or backsword. I'm not going to do that with that one, for sure. With this one here, well, you know, maybe then you know things can go wrong if you do happen to catch a parry on the disc, but you know, you can change it easily. It's just a standard part you can replace, and it isn't gonna hurt your wallet and soul as much as if anything would happen to a nicer piece. So in that regard, I really think this is something that you can take a look at and consider, really. I like it for what it is. I have other options, but you know, definitely something worth considering, I'd say. So, cheers.